Good evening. You've got 10 seconds. 10 seconds to name 3 things that God did for you today. Time's counting. Could you think that quick? I know that God did something good today. And I hope that you are aware of that and what He did. And every week, it is such a blessing to be able to share God's Word. And Wednesday nights are always great because we take kind of a break in the middle of the week and kind of just refuel a little bit. And so I don't know what the beginning of your week has been like, but no doubt there have been at least 1 or 2 challenges. And so we're going to look at God's Word tonight, and I'm excited about tonight and what we're looking at. Too often we kind of let ourselves dry up a little bit, if you will. We get used to the routine, we get used to the way things are, and even though things around us are continually changing, we can kind of get in a rut, maybe dry up. We were looking at a well the other day, and it brought to my mind Genesis chapter 26. If you'll go ahead and turn over there. Verse 1 says, "And there was a famine in the land, beside the first famine was in the days of Abraham, and Isaac went up to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, unto Gerar." And when you stop and you think about that, there was a famine in the land in that day. What type of famine exists in your life today? You know, in order for a famine to begin, things have to begin to dry up. Maybe not anything that you've seen right away. It may be a couple of days of drought here and a couple of days of drought next. But eventually you begin to notice, hey, it hasn't rained in a while. And this isn't doing so well, and this doesn't show signs of life, and this isn't just doing like it should. We planted a little kind of city garden this year, and it's been a lot of fun to watch our pepper grow, and we've got a tomato that's about halfway there, and we've got another tomato plant where it's about golf ball size right now. And my wife is so impatient, she came up yesterday and said, "Can't we just go ahead and pick the larger one and let it ripen on its own?" And I said, "No, we have to wait on it. We have to be patient." But it's exciting to watch things grow. But it takes a couple of factors for things to grow, doesn't it? You can't just put a seed out there and set it out on the windowsill and tell it to grow. It takes a combination of things, and one of those things is water. And in the days that we're talking about here in Genesis, there were wells that had been begun back in the days of Abraham, but the Philistines came and took over, and the wells were not only stopped in the digging of them, but the Philistines actually polluted them, clogged them up, to deprive the Israelites of water to run them out. The Philistines filled these wells with any number of things. Can you imagine drinking polluted water? Can you imagine living in a life where your water supply was taken away from you? It's a basic necessity of life. But what about your life today? How is your basic necessities? Are you facing a famine without even really realizing it? The things that used to be vibrant and full in your life now have begun to wither and die. How dry would you say your well is today? It's something that we need to stop and we really need to take a look at. There are a number of factors in your world today that could pose a problem to the well that you have. So what do you do when your well runs dry? Not just the well, but any number of the wells that you have dug, if you will, in your life. You see, you need to realize that restoration is necessary. Isaac saw that there was a famine in those days. He saw that the wells had been dried up after the Philistines. Verse 16, "And Isaac digged again the wells of water, which they had digged in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham. And he called their names after the names by which his father had called them. Not only did they pollute them, the purpose of the Philistines was to deny the use of these wells to the descendants of Abraham. They said, we're not only going to make it difficult for you now, but we're going to make it difficult for all of those who come after you. Look at your world today. Realize that it is much the same as what Isaac faced here. The damage that is being done to the things of God today is not simply to impact us as the individuals. It is meant as a change in the course of history. It is a desire of Satan to change life for our descendants. Change it today and they'll adjust tomorrow. The basic necessities. You've seen over the past months what it's like to realize that you're not guaranteed the basic necessities. That in a moment's notice, life at the very basic level can change before your very eyes. Israel faced something similar. The Philistines came in and they hated God. They began to change life for Israel. They brought in a different culture. They brought in a different agenda. They brought in a different motive. The children of Israel soon learned to begin to live in the land of the Philistines, the environment of the Philistines. The entire nation was impacted. The culture was changed. Turn over to Proverbs 18:15, if you will. When famine begins to dry up wells, or when the wells are stopped up of someone else's accord, what do? You see, there was a period of time when the work on the wells ceased and Israel began to just live in the confines of the environment that had been created for them. Are you living that way today? In a world not full of a well that's filled with water, or even filled with a number of wells, God gives us an opportunity to enjoy the vibrancy of life. But so many people associate that vibrancy with things other than the Word of God, and unfortunately, too many Christians today have fallen into that same category. The things of God have fallen to the side. How many times do you think that Israel remembered the days of famine? Remembered the days of what God could do? Or simply adapted to life as it was changing before them? You see, when change comes, it can only go one of two ways. It's either going to change for the better, or it's going to change for the worse. But you have to realize that we have a responsibility in the midst of that change. You need to recognize not only that the restoration is necessary, but that change comes with a purpose. What is the purpose in the change that you face, and what changes need to come in the face of where we live? Are you seeking God's purpose, or are you just rolling with it day to day? I'll make that decision tomorrow. I'll deal with that another day. God has a reason for the changes that we face in life. When you look at Proverbs 18:15, it says, the heart of the prudent getteth knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeketh knowledge. What are you seeking today during a time of change? Are you merely seeking consistency? A return to the routine? How many of us can even remember what the routine used to be? Things have changed and will continue to change, but will you change? That well's dried up. Are you going to dig another well? Are you going to look for that vibrancy once again? Or are you simply going to say, oh, well, enough of that well? There's purpose in change, but are you changing on purpose? There is a purpose in change, but are you changing on purpose? When we allow ourselves to continue in the path that we are in, without looking to God for guidance, without looking to God for wisdom, without seeking knowledge, it means your well is going to dry up. Because that wisdom and that knowledge is the source of direction of God in your life. No direction means complete stability. Complete stability, especially in the case of water. Have you ever seen a stagnant pond? Had a one time where we were traveling and I was able to show my wife some of the ponds that we swam in as kids. They were stagnant. And she said, "You swam in that?" I said, "Well, it didn't look quite that bad then. I don't know if it was that bad when we swam in it, but we swam in some interesting water holes." But I can't say that I would want to go to a stagnant pond and take a drink out of it. Tasted water out of a well that had a dead rabbit in it. It wasn't the most flavorful drink either. How would you describe your well today? Full of fresh, clear water? Something you look forward to, something you're eager to go drink from? You see, when we have to look for God's knowledge, we have to come to the realization that a finite mind can't understand the depths of the plan of an infinite God. A finite mind cannot understand the depths of the plan of an infinite God. And yet so many people are letting their wells run dry. Can you imagine back in those days, in the days of Israel, if they would have simply said, "Oh, that well doesn't matter, and that well doesn't matter, and after a time, we're fine without water." Maybe yours is the well of joy. Maybe it's the well of peace. Maybe it's the well of following God's will. We could add a number of names because isn't it interesting that you'll note in a few verses that Isaac went back and renamed the wells the names that his father had given them. They meant something. But you have to recognize first that it takes time and it takes effort to go dig another well. Those Philistines came and they polluted them and they clogged them and they filled them in, and Satan is walking around today trying to fill up your well, trying to clog it and pollute it, trying to make you think that that well is not worth the effort that it takes to keep it pure. Satan likely says, if I fill up that well today, they won't take the effort to go and undo it, so I will have won another victory. It's going to take some work. Isaac didn't just walk in and say, Take a few shovels out. It took some work. It took some effort. But it was worth the effort. He remembered the days of Abraham. He remembered the names of the well. When you have names associated with the wells in those days, it wasn't just because that well over there needed a name. It was because that well meant something. God did a work at that well. And so it was named to provide a reference so that people could recognize the work that God had done at that well. It's time that we begin to reference what God can do, add a name to it, and say, God, go help me dig another well so I can show people what you are still doing. Satan would be more than satisfied to sit back on that old stump beside the well, cross his arms, cross his legs, and not worry about a thing. Because that Christian's not going to go over there and dig another well. They're just going to go on with whatever the result of the dried up well is. And after a time, they're not even going to miss that old well. They're just going to go on with life. Just as in the days of the Philistines, Satan would love to pollute it, to clog it, to ruin it at all costs, to deprive you of the results of a good well. Are you willing to be deprived? Are you willing to step back and say, I'm okay to forget what God's done? Because remember, it wasn't just a well, it was a place where God provided. That water came from God. Satan would love to have you forget that. He would love to have you stand by and watch. Imagine being in those days and standing there and watching a well that had provided water to your family. And somebody walks over and begins to pour dirt in it, to dump their garbage into it, to throw those dead animals in it. It's time that we realize that the well is important. Deuteronomy chapter 6. We're going to look at verses 10 and 11. And it shall be, when the Lord thy God shall have brought thee into the land which he sware unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give thee great and goodly cities, which thou buildest not, and houses full of all good things, which thou fillest not, and wells digged, which thou diggest not, vineyards and olive trees, which thou plantest not. When thou shalt have eaten and be full, God let them dig these wells. He let Isaac redig the wells. But then he tells them, there's going to be a land that I'm going to give you, and you're not going to have to dig the well. The interesting thing to note in this passage is that it wasn't just the wells, it was what surrounded the wells. The vineyards and the olive trees. Notice the fullness of what God provided as a result of the water that also flowed through the well. You see, that water, that's one of those necessary components of growth. And when you let your wells run dry, you rob yourself of one of those components of growth. The body can't make it an extremely long time without water. How are your wells doing today? Have they already been clogged by Satan's devices? Are they filling up fast? When you need that cool drink of water, that refreshment in life, if you will, can you run to your well? Or would you have to spit and sputter and say, that's not what I need? You see, God began to show the things that would be a result of the water that flowed through that well. In other words, He showed His provision. Too many times we sacrifice contentment, and we fail to see what we lose being content with a lack of effort, with a lack of desire. Because if there's a lack of effort to dig another well, then there's a lack of desire to see what would come as a result of the effort put into digging that well. What about you tonight? Are you just plain tired of digging wells? Are you tired of looking for the Lord to fill that well? Not only were those wells there, but God led them to those wells. He gave them an opportunity to dig those wells again, an opportunity to reference what they had been called, and an opportunity to enjoy the results of the well once again. Is your life not enjoyable tonight? Have you forgotten the blessings that come from a clear well? Are you content to sit back and watch Satan fill your well without even putting up a fight? Without even seeking that wisdom and that knowledge that we read about in Proverbs and saying, God, I don't want my wells to be filled with polluted stuff. Lord, I want my well to be fed by you. And Lord, I want the results of a well filled by you. You see, Jesus sat by another well in John chapter 4. That was Jacob's well. And He spoke and He said to the woman that she could have seen. Jesus answered and said unto her, if thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, give me to drink, thou wouldest asked of Him, and He would have given thee living water. You see, that's the living water we're talking about. Yes, those were physical wells. And they had a physical source, but God provided that source. And that source brought life. It brought refreshment. It brought cleansing. Jesus said He was the living water. You see, that is what is being sought to be distinguished, to be polluted in the well, if you will. And it's time that we stood back and we realized, am I sorry to see my wells go? Am I sorry to see them dry up? Do I miss them? Then my challenge to you is this: reflect back as Isaac did to the days of Abraham, back when there was a famine, what that famine felt like, what it was told to be like. Maybe that famine is present in your life today. And maybe it's time that you said, I'm tired of the famine that exists in my life. I'm tired of getting every day, getting up, having it dry, having to search. Or maybe you're just getting up and you're saying, it's not worth my effort. There's no need for me to go dig another well. I'll just deal with what I got. Whatsoever thy hand findest to do, do it with all thy might. That doesn't mean sit around and watch somebody pollute your well. It doesn't mean sit around and just hope that the well is going to dig itself. And most of all, don't think that your well only pertains to you, because the result of your well is going to impact the life of someone else. Wouldn't it be better to live a life where you can impact others in a positive way? Hey, you need some water? Come over to my well. Better yet, let me explain to you what living water means. But they see the joy and the prosperity and the peace that comes from knowing that you have a well that's still flowing. Sure, they may see you battle with Satan. Stay away from my well. Don't pollute my well. Don't clog up my well. But you have the strength of God to help you do that. But Isaac looked back and he remembered the days of famine. You know, he realized and he recognized at that point that he did not want famine to be in the land again. How detrimental it was, how harmful it was, and what was lost because of the famine. My friend, tonight the things of God are beginning to disintegrate. There is coming a famine of which we've never seen. We still got time to dig another well, to stop and to reconsider our ways, to stop and to say, I want a well. I don't want something that looks like the rest of the landscape. I want the refreshment. I want the joy, I want the peace, I want the comfort, I want the blessing of God on my life. I am willing to put in the time, I am willing to put in the effort and dig another well. Don't you imagine that there was a great deal of joy when they began to dig those wells and they began to see the water once again come forth? Isaac would have been able to say, dig that one. And while you're digging it, go ahead and rename it. We're going to call that one what it was called before. And you over there, dig that well. And you, go ahead, dig. And to dig with the assurance that there was water there. Not to have to sit and scratch his head and say, well, I'm kind of hoping maybe there's some right there. He had the ability to say, this spot here used to be filled with water. It used to be such and such a well. You dig right here and we're going to call it that again. You can stand today and you can look back over history and you can find a well here and there and you can say, I can see where God was blessing there and I can see how God did that in my life as well. And I remember the good old days when God was obviously at work. You know, if God was at work in your life and God hasn't changed, then what should that tell you about that well? You see, the well's still in the same place, fed by the same God. It's just that maybe right now it's full of something else. What have you filled your well with? Better question. What are you willing to take out of your well to make it vibrant again? Because you see, they had to dig through all the filth and the garbage and everything, and at any time they could have said, "Oh, I can't dig any further. This is terrible." They were faced with what was in the well. You will be faced with what's in your well. But are you going to stop and say, I got to quit. It's not important enough to me to get this out of my well. I'm just going to dig around it. You're going to have to dig through it. You're going to have to get that trash out of the well. So you got your choice. Are you more concerned about what's at the bottom of the well or what you got to go through to get to the bottom of the well? Because in order for God to work, to get that well working again, you got to get back down to ground level where the water was. Digging a well sometimes isn't easy. Digging a well that's been polluted is even worse. But do you have it in you tonight? Or are you going to sit back, pull you up another little log beside Satan over here, and say, "Hey, move over just a little bit. I got to sit down." That's hard work. I can't be digging this well any longer. I quit. I dug down a little ways and there wasn't any water, so I must have failed. Satan's going to pat you on the back and say, "I think so. I agree with you. You failed. You might as well give up. Don't work yourself too hard. I mean, after all, is it really worth it?" You see, I don't imagine out there where they were digging wells, it was all air conditioned and cool and happy. It was hot work. It was difficult. It was labor intensive. And they didn't have a backhoe. You know, it's going to take some work to unclog that well. But again, I'm going to say it. Remember back to when God helped it to stop a famine. God allowed it to be clogged for a purpose. And maybe that purpose was to give them a better understanding of what they had lost, an appreciation for what could be, and a desire for what He could do. Are you ready to dig another well tonight? Or are you and others like you going to turn around, turn their back to the situation, walk away and say, "It's not worth digging another well"? Realize that the Philistines had cut off the wells to impact the descendants of those at that time. The Philistines weren't only seeking to defeat Israel now, they were seeking to defeat them forever. Satan is not desiring simply to defeat you, but everyone that you could influence for God. How would you like to stand before God one day and say, "Sorry, God, I just couldn't dig anymore. I don't care whether you had water at the bottom of that well. I don't care whether you're going to refresh my well or not. I don't care whether there was water there at one time or not. Lord, I got tired of digging and I quit." You've got a choice. Just like those who dug those wells had a choice. To stop and say, "Too much. I don't want to dig it. I don't have a desire to dig it, and I'm not going to dig it. And I don't care what happens to those who come after me. I don't care about those that could be impacted by a well right there. By my ability to go to them and say, 'Hey, you know what? I hit a hard time in my life and my wells were dry. My joy was gone. My peace was disturbed. There was no comfort in the life that I was living, but I realized that when I look back how life had been before I met God, what it was like when I met God, what it was like after I gave up on God, and I made a choice. I don't want to live a life without a well, and I don't want to live a life without God, and I don't want to live a life with a well that isn't fed by God. Proverbs said to seek wisdom and knowledge. What do you think that the wisdom and the knowledge in this is? Dig another well. Don't be satisfied with opening up one. Don't be satisfied with opening up two. You keep digging until all the wells that you have polluted and allowed Satan to clog, until they're once again flowing with the living water that God can give you. And I'll guarantee you your life will change. It doesn't matter what the area around you is like. It doesn't matter what the environment is like. The wells are there. They need to be dug. And it's time you got to digging. Failure is not our opportunity. I mentioned that Satan would be sitting on this log over here watching you not dig. Cheering you on. Adding to your frustration. Have you ever stopped to think instead that maybe God's standing on the other side yearning for you to dig that well? Child, let me show you what I can do when you dig that well. Let me remind you of what's underneath all the filth. Let me remind you of the time when you took my Bible, when you took my word and you read it and you couldn't put it down. The joy that you gained from sweet fellowship with me. Oh, we could add some names to some wells tonight. But you may already know the names of your wells. Which ones have you neglected? Which ones would you walk away from tonight and leave and say, I'm just tired of trying? Because one day, there'll be another generation that looks back on the spot where your well was. And what will they call your well? What will their discussion be about that region? Well, God used to work there. There was a well there, and there's a long story behind it, but the story really doesn't matter, because all I can say is that one that had the opportunity before me, that could have left that well vibrant and living for me, they walked away from the well. They walked away and they didn't care about us. They didn't care about tomorrow. Evidently, they didn't care a whole lot about themselves, because they walked away from a well that God had given them. They left it full of filth. They left it useless for any who would come along. What about you tonight? What about your wells? Are they in need of restoration? Do you recognize that it's going to take some effort and some time? But will you remember the results that God has promised? You see, God doesn't break His promises. God wouldn't have told Isaac anything less than the truth. If you'll read the verses around there in Genesis, you'll realize that God greatly blessed Isaac, to the point where they told him to go away. You are mightier than we are. Wouldn't it be great to live in a world where people looked at you and saw the power of God in your life in such a way that they said, your God is too much for me? You see, God can still defeat evil. And God can still give you power in your life. He can give you what it takes to dig that well, to take out the garbage, and to once again to see it overflowing. Remember what I said about change. Only one of two ways. It's either going to change for the worse or it's going to change for the better. Which do you really want tonight? Because change for the better is only going to come through you digging some wells. For you looking to God for strength and for guidance and for wisdom and for power. Maybe it's time we started digging some wells. Because wouldn't it be wonderful to stand back and point at that well and give it a name and says, that one right there, God showed me this. God taught me this. And that one over there, God taught me something else. And God showed me His will, and God showed me His direction, and God showed me that He was bigger than even an old filthy well. Because remember what He told them that they would find in the land that He would take them to. It was a whole lot more than water. And we're willing to go, when we're willing to go to the place where God wants us to go, there's going to be more there than we imagined. We're short-sighted people. We only see with the finite eye, but God has a much greater plan in mind. Take some time tonight, if you will. Think about the well that's gone dry. Think of what you've sacrificed. Think of what you've lost. Think of the trash you need to take out. But realize that it's going to be worth the effort to see God work once again in a way that He wants to work, and a powerful way in our lives. God can do things that we never deemed imaginable. Unless you just say, I'm not interested in God being at work in my life. Not interested in God being at work in my ministry. Not interested in God being at work in my home. I'm good with a dry well. For me, I'd love to see what God can do when I'm willing to put in the effort to dig up that well. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank You for the day You've given us. Lord, we thank You for the vibrancy that You give us in life. And Lord, the purpose. And we just pray that You'll guide and direct now. Lord, that You'll use Your word, apply it to our hearts. Lord, help us to go dig some wells. Lord, to open up what once was so that we can see You and Your power again in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope it's been a blessing. Go find you a well to dig tonight.
Oh, to see the dawn of the darkest day, Christ on the road to Calvary, tried by sinful men, torn and beaten men, nailed to a cross of wood. This the power of the cross. Christ became sin for us, took the blame, bore the wrath we stand, forgiven at the cross. Oh, to see the pain written on your face, buried crowning your blood-stained brow, is the power of the cross. Christ became sin for us, took